The first thing I noticed was the sound. Not thunder. Not rain. Just the sharp crack of aluminum poles snapping under a powerful gust of mountain wind, followed by a surprised laugh that somehow sounded brighter than the afternoon sun itself. I looked up from my small camp stove and saw a bright blue tent collapse like a folded paper bird, disappearing beneath a cloud of dust and scattered camping gear. In the middle of the mess stood a young woman brushing strands of hair away from her face, smiling as if the universe had just told her the funniest joke. Then she looked toward me, raised one eyebrow, and said that maybe we could share my tent tonight. Before we continue, if you believe kindness and second chances can change someone's life forever, take a moment to support Storyverse by liking this video, sharing it with someone who loves emotional stories, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment about a time when a stranger's kindness made a difference in your life. Now let's begin. My name was Rowan, and for the past 2 years I had avoided people whenever possible. Friends assumed I was busy with work. Family believed I needed time after losing my father. The truth was more complicated. After months of caring for him through illness, watching him slowly disappear despite every hopeful promise from doctors, I found it easier to hide from the world than to explain why laughter felt unfamiliar. Every vacation day I earned at work became another excuse to disappear into nature, where mountains never asked uncomfortable questions and forests never expected cheerful conversations. That autumn weekend I had driven to Pine Hollow National Forest, a peaceful place known for its quiet lakes, endless pine trees, and golden afternoon light that made everything look as if it belonged inside an old photograph. It was supposed to rain overnight, but the forecast had promised a calm day. No one expected the sudden burst of mountain wind that swept through the campground. The owner of the collapsed tent introduced herself as Mira. She was traveling alone with an old camera hanging around her neck and a backpack covered in colorful patches collected from different hiking trails. While everyone else nearby rushed to protect their own campsites, she simply laughed at the twisted remains of her shelter as though disappointment had lost the ability to frighten her. I helped gather her scattered belongings before the wind carried them into the trees. Sleeping bag. Lantern. Notebook. Half-finished watercolor paintings. A tiny music box wrapped carefully inside a sweater. Every item seemed to tell a story about someone who collected memories instead of expensive possessions. She thanked me with genuine warmth rather than embarrassment. She admitted that the tent had already survived too many adventures and probably deserved retirement months earlier. She joked that the mountains had simply made the decision for her. Normally I would have wished her luck and returned to my own campsite. Instead I heard myself offering spare rope, extra food, and eventually the only practical solution available. My tent was built for 2 people even though I always camped alone. Something about her smile made the awkwardness disappear before it could even begin. As the afternoon slowly turned golden, we repaired what little we could of her equipment while sharing coffee brewed over my small stove. Conversation came surprisingly easily. She wasn't interested in impressing anyone. She asked thoughtful questions, listened carefully, and somehow made silence feel comfortable instead of uncomfortable. She explained that she traveled across the country painting landscapes she never intended to sell. Every location reminded her that beautiful moments existed even when they disappeared quickly. She believed memories became more valuable precisely because they could never be repeated. I admitted that I hadn't painted, written, or photographed anything since my father passed away. Even saying those words aloud felt unfamiliar. Most people responded with sympathy that ended conversations. Mira simply nodded with quiet understanding, allowing the sadness to exist without trying to erase it. The evening sunlight stretched across the lake like liquid gold. Families roasted marshmallows while children chased one another between the campsites. Somewhere in the distance someone played an old acoustic guitar, and the melody floated gently through the cool air. For the first time in months I realized I wasn't counting the hours until I could leave. After dinner we walked along a narrow trail circling the lake. Fallen leaves crunched beneath our boots while birds settled into the trees for the night. Mira stopped frequently to photograph tiny details most people ignored, a single feather resting on a rock, sunlight shining through orange leaves, ripples spreading across perfectly still water. She explained that happiness often hid inside ordinary moments because everyone was searching for extraordinary ones. Her words stayed with me. That night the rain finally arrived. It began as a gentle whisper against the tent before growing into steady applause across the forest canopy. We talked quietly inside the warm shelter while listening to nature perform its endless concert outside. She shared stories about growing up with grandparents who taught her to appreciate simple things. They had little money but somehow managed to fill every day with joy. After losing both of them within the same year, she promised herself she would continue traveling to places they had always dreamed of visiting. I found myself telling stories I hadn't shared with anyone in years. Memories of fishing trips with my father. The terrible jokes he insisted on repeating every holiday. The way he believed every difficult season eventually made room for a better one. Somewhere during those conversations, grief stopped feeling like a locked room and started feeling like an open window. Morning arrived wrapped in silver mist. The storm had washed every tree clean, leaving countless droplets sparkling like tiny diamonds beneath the rising sun. The damaged tent was beyond repair, but the campground manager offered to store it until she could replace it after returning home. Instead of rushing away, we decided to spend one more day exploring hidden trails deeper inside the forest. Hours passed almost unnoticed. We crossed wooden bridges above rushing streams, climbed rocky overlooks with breathtaking views, and discovered a forgotten meadow where hundreds of wildflowers somehow continued blooming despite the approaching winter. At the highest viewpoint, we sat quietly watching clouds drift beneath distant mountain peaks. Mira opened the small notebook I had found among her belongings and handed it to me. Inside were sketches, poems, and handwritten reflections from every place she visited. Some pages celebrated joyful discoveries. Others spoke honestly about loneliness, fear, and hope. The final blank page waited patiently. She asked me to write something. At first I refused. Then I remembered something my father once told me after I ruined my first attempt at building a birdhouse. He said unfinished things only stayed unfinished because people became afraid of trying again. So I wrote one sentence. I remembered how to smile today. Mira read it without saying anything. Instead, she carefully closed the notebook and slipped it back into her backpack. As evening approached, we returned to camp where reality quietly reminded us that weekends eventually end. She would continue her journey north. I would return to my apartment, my office, and the familiar routines waiting back home. Unexpected friendships often arrive without promises. The next morning we packed our belongings beneath bright blue skies. Before leaving, she handed me the tiny music box I had noticed earlier. I tried refusing. She insisted. She explained that it had belonged to her grandmother, but memories were never trapped inside objects. They lived inside the people who carried them forward through kindness. When I opened the music box, a gentle melody filled the crisp morning air. It happened to be the same lullaby my father used to hum while repairing old furniture in our garage. Neither of us could explain the coincidence. Perhaps some moments don't need explanations. Months passed. Life returned to its ordinary rhythm, yet something fundamental had changed. Instead of spending weekends alone inside my apartment, I volunteered at local hiking programs teaching young people basic camping skills. I started taking photographs again. I laughed more often. I even called friends simply to ask how they were doing. One spring afternoon an envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a watercolor painting. It showed two tents beneath towering pine trees. One stood proudly. The other had collapsed into colorful fabric. Between them stretched warm afternoon sunlight. On the back she had written only one sentence. The best shelters are built with kindness. I framed the painting above my desk. Years later I still return to Pine Hollow every autumn. Sometimes storms arrive. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes strangers need help setting up camp. Whenever I offer an extra rope, a warm meal, or simply a friendly conversation, I remember the afternoon when a fallen tent unexpectedly rebuilt a broken heart. If this story has touched your heart so far, please leave a comment sharing the lesson that stayed with you the most. Your words may become the encouragement someone else desperately needs today. There is something extraordinary about ordinary kindness. We rarely recognize its importance while it is happening. A shared meal, a helping hand, an extra blanket, or a simple smile can quietly redirect the entire course of another person's life. Most miracles don't arrive with dramatic music or impossible events. They arrive disguised as everyday people choosing compassion when it would have been easier to walk away. Before this story ends, please comment with the words, "Kindness always finds a way." As I packed my own tent one final time that season, I looked across the peaceful lake where golden sunlight danced upon gentle waves. The place hadn't changed. The mountains were the same. The trees were the same. The only difference was the person walking away from them. Sometimes healing doesn't happen because life suddenly becomes easier. Sometimes it begins because a stranger reminds us that even after life's strongest storms knock everything down, there is still room beneath someone else's shelter until we find the strength to build our own again. And perhaps that is the greatest adventure any heart can ever experience.